It's so good to have you here for this next class of Gateway Tshuva. We're on page 242 right at the bottom in volume 3 of this edition of the Tanya, for those of you who are following in the book. And we're now looking at the definition of tshuva in a little bit more depth and a little bit more detail. And we're discussing the difference between how things worked in the time of the Bais Hamikdash, in the time of the temple, when the Shekhinah was visible, palpable, had a place that it dwelled, and the way it worked then, versus after the destruction of the temple, and the way it is now since we're in exile, and also the Shekhinah is in exile. And one of the big questions that the rabbis had was, it says in our tradition that if you do certain sins, like we're using for our class, the terrible sin of eating chametz on Pesach, that is actually karet, you get cut off, your soul gets cut off. And it should be that because we have these divine souls and our body gets its life only through the divine soul, as it was in the time of Bais Hamikdash, that if we do something that creates kares, that means we're now no longer plugged in. And like my excellent Apple mouse, it just ran out of power, right? I have to plug it in. It lasts maybe a week or two and then kaput. Now it's just a paperweight until I plug it in again. And if I can't reattach it, if it's karet, if it's completely detached from its source of energy, in the end, it'll run out. And this is what we should look like at the age of 50 or 60. If we've eaten chametz on Pesach, we should have no vital energy in our body and we should not live past that age. But of course, we look around, there's many people who, you know, we don't want to keep records on our friends and neighbors, but many people who clearly are doing sins, it's a common thing, and yet are living long lives and even happy, healthy, God willing, productive, wealthy lives. So now the Alter Rebbe is explaining that since the time of the destruction of the Bais Hamikdash, we no longer get our energy for our body directly through the divine side of things. When the Shekhinah was exiled, which meant this great, call it visible, palpable, revealed divine light that was there in the Bais Hamikdash, the fire that came down on the altar, etc. When the temple was destroyed and we were exiled, that divine energy came into exile with us. And now that light started flowing into the klipa, into the klipa noga, the one klipa that mixes good and evil. And we get our life energy through that. And so if we cut off our direct line, it doesn't really matter to our body because our body can draw the divine energy that's coming through klipa noga, through that is the shell of reality of just neutral stuff that you can use to do good things. So that is one difference, is that we now will live past the age of 50 or 60 because we get our energy from not directly anymore from the divine and holy side of things, but we get it also from Klipa Noga. But we learned a second thing, which is key to our discussion of tshuva, which is that when I do an avera, when I eat that chametz on Pesach, God forbid, or any other avera counterproductive activity you could think about, what happens to that divine light that was created to feed me and to feed the holy things that I'm doing so that I would reflect light back up and create new unifications above and fulfill my purpose as a soul, instead of being kept in this cycle of holy energy and spiritual growth, it is diverted, parasitically even, into not just this klipa noga, this intermediate klipa, but into the 3 bottom klipot, the 3 completely impure klipot, where it has no business being. And that's something that we, as Jews in particular, our role can really be corrupted to that point where we are feeding this absolutely negative side of reality, and it's getting this tremendous energy from us. So it's really expanding and it's growing. And the Alter Rebbe said, again, when it does, it's so happy with us that we're channeling this exquisite, high quality divine light down into the very basement of reality where it shouldn't be, that the 3 impure klipot, those spiritual forces will reward us, will feed us with what? With worldliness. And worldliness could mean wealth, could mean YouTube views, it could mean fame, it could even mean physical health, live a long, healthy life, all those things, just to keep us on that track thinking, look at me, I'm doing so good. I feel so good. Why should I change? In fact, I'll double down and I'll do the same thing even more and feed these klipot more. So this is a dynamic we should understand, because in the next chapter, we're going into really focusing on the impact of when we do an Avera and how it affects not me, but how it affects God. And that's going to be the main shift, is getting out of myself and seeing this from God's perspective and feeling it from God's perspective. So any questions on that catch up? We've got 2 more pages of this chapter. So we're now on page 242, right at the bottom, because go ahead, Linda.
Because it is he, the sinful individual, who draws the flow of vitality into the chambers of the Sitra Ahara, it is he who receives the greatest portion from them.
So maybe you think this energy just goes into generally the Sitra Achara and it's just sort of dispersed generally. But no, the Sitra Achara, the 3 empirically put, the other side, it is a spiritual force with intellect. And it will know where its energy is coming from. It does have strategies. And when you feed it, it's very happy. And it will send that energy in the form of worldly goodness back your way, but not for good reasons, right? Essentially, it's creating an addictive behavior, right? So we know what that's about. So, and because I'm the one that provided the Sitra Achara with all this beautiful divine energy, instead of the minute, small amount of low-grade energy it was supposed to receive from God, now it's going to thank me personally. It's going to try and encourage me to keep doing that. And it's going to give me the bulk of the growth, the bloating from that, on that side of things.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What do they mean by the chambers?
Chambers, the question is, what do they mean by the chambers of the Sitra Achara? Right? Every spiritual level has its godliness, so to speak, which is creating it. And then it has all the structure of its spiritual world, which is not just a uniform place, so to speak, spiritually. It actually has a structure. It's a living thing. And so chambers is a word for just the different levels of holiness or the opposite of holiness that exist in that structure, right? So if you look at the world of Bria, the world of Bria has the godliness of Bria. Then it also has the actual spiritual world of Bria, and they call those chambers, and you can move around in there, just like in the physical world. I can climb up Mount Everest, or I can dig a hole and bury myself, God forbid. V'day l'mevin, this will suffice for the understanding. So we're now, I guess we're the understanding. It suffices for us. Okay. V'zeu shamru, Rabbeinu zichron livracha, ein biyadenu lo mishalvat harashayim v'chulu. Go ahead, I think, Susan.
Hence the statement of our sages of blessed memory. It is not within our hands. In other words, it is not given us to understand the reason for either the tranquility of the wicked or the suffering of the righteous.
Right, and here, this has been commented on quite a bit, that it's something of a strange place for the Alter Rebbe to point this out, because now he's saying it's not within our hands, which we'll explain in a minute. So whatever that means, to understand why wicked might have peace and good and life, and bad things might happen to good people. The righteous might have suffering. And you read this and you say, hold on, did you just explain why? We just understood why, because now we live in the time of after the destruction of the temple. So if someone's wicked, they're not necessarily cut off. In fact, the empirically put are rewarding them, and that's why they have good things. So we haven't exactly explained why a righteous might suffer, but it seems a strange place to put this. And just quickly, the sources explain this quote. It's not within our hands to understand, etc., which is from Pirkei Avot. We've read it in Pirkei Avot, right? They explain it in 2 ways. One, it's not within our hands, meaning we can't understand. It puzzles us. 2, it's not within our hands, meaning that actually is not occurring anymore. It's not happening now. And in fact, the last Rebbe of this tradition wrote a nice explanation where he said the second reason explains the first reason. And what did he mean? He meant specifically that, in fact, we don't actually see the wicked people being very, very successful. We don't see the same kind of dynamic as we had before the destruction of the temple. And why? Why is that we don't see it, which we wouldn't understand? That's the first reason, is because, in fact, when we were in the time of the temple and we saw godliness directly and we were charged and connected, you'd have to really be almost unbalanced, and you really have to have a lack of judgment to do an avera, because you'd see right away the connection, you'd see the impact. Who would want to do that? Now, the Rebbe said, after the destruction of the temple, in particular our generation, after what happened in the 20th century, there's really no such thing as a Rasha anymore. There's no such thing as really a wicked person. And what do you expect of us? Right now, we're living without any palpable connection to divinity like we had. We've been through so much suffering. We have legitimate reasons to question. So you can't compare someone that does an avera in our generation to someone that did an avera in the time of the temple, where they, okay, I went to the temple, I gave my sacrifice, I saw godliness, I felt like I was one and a part of it. Then I went home and I'm knowing all that, I did a sin. That's a Rasha that gets cut off. But somebody born post-Holocaust who looks and sees just a physical world and is bombarded with Western ideas like materialism and has never really had a fully palpable connection in their consciousness like you had in the temple, they go do an avera. Now you're going to call them a Rasha? Forget about it. What do you expect, right? So the Rebbe said that this doesn't apply now. And if we want to know why it is that Jews throughout history have been suffering, even though they're righteous, basically that's why, because we don't see this dynamic anymore, that the wicked get rewarded, because that the wicked get rewarded because there really aren't wicked people anymore, right? We're not truly a Rasha. And another explanation that even makes it more complicated is sometimes God decides to really amp up the consequences. And if someone is a tzaddik and God wants to really reward them and have them skip any possible Gehenna, any possible like post-life stress from being kind of washed and dried, that God will give them little punishments in their life to just take care of it and get it out of the way. And then at 120, when they're done, now they have absolutely nothing. It's all been taken care of. It's all off the record, so to speak, and they can just go straight to their place in the upper Garden of Eden. And the reverse is also true, that sometimes if someone lives a really determinedly negative life, God will actually, if they have some rewards, because everybody has done some good things, God will just give them the reward in the life now, so that when they're done their life, they actually have nothing on the side of that record to defend them, and God can completely do what's necessary. So it's a whole complicated thing, and we shouldn't ultimately try and figure out like why it is that this kind of reward or that kind of word, or what it means and interpret. Know that it's quite complex. And to me, this page is here to kind of just put that to rest, that when I'm working on tshuva, I shouldn't do calculations about, well, if I had a good year this year, it means that really I didn't do anything bad. Not necessarily. Or if something bad happened to me, it meant that I'm a lost cause. Definitely not. In the end, just do your tshuva and leave that other side of the questions to God to figure out. Make sense? Biadenu davka klamar bizman hagalut achar churban. Let's go ahead, Stuart.
Okay. The quotation, or this is the expression. Okay. The quotation specifies in our hands, i.e., in this time of exile, after the destruction, when the wicked receive added vitality through the Kelipot and Sitra Achara. This this is an expression of the exile of the divine presence, as it were, during which time the life force emanating from the latter hay flows into the keli pot.
Right, so as we said, this time after the destruction is a different time than before the destruction, and the main difference is the Shekhinah is now in exile with us, and its divine life force is flowing into the Klipa Noga. Lahashpia lehechlod asitra achra sher san'a nafsho yitbarech ucheshe hadam oseh tshuva nechona hazai misalek mehem hashpa'a shemshich b'masav u'machshvotav.
These God's granting supplementary measures of life force to the chambers of the Sitra Achara that he despises. However, when the sinner repents appropriately, he then removes from them the life force that he had drawn into them through his deeds and thoughts.
So now this is a beautiful source of inspiration. It might be a little heavy to meditate on the idea that when I do an Aveir, I'm actually feeding this negative side of reality and look back and think of the last week or month or year. But here we see what happens when we do tshuva. What happens? We don't just stop the process of feeding the negative side of reality. We actually have the opportunity to draw that energy back, right? So it will take that life force out of the negative side of the world. The bloating, the excess that we may have caused in the three empirically put, however that manifests, will now collapse back to its natural state, which is basically just a nothing, right? It's just a shell. It's just an illusion, so to speak. It's not really the key core part of reality. It just pretends to be bigger. So that'll collapse back, and that energy will flow back into holiness, and it'll start to correct really everything about my place in the world. So as negative as the consequences of an Aveira are, we want to understand that when we do proper tshuva, we can reverse everything. And that energy now can go back to doing the good it was supposed to do. Ki b'tshuvato machazir hashpat hashchina limkoma. Go ahead, Noreen, you want to read nice and full? For by
his repentance, he returns the flow issuing from the Shekhinah to its proper place.
Right, so if I repent, I'll return the flow issuing from the Shekhinah to its proper place. So like it was supposed to be when I did eat the matzah and do a bless. Well, let's not go that far, but it'll flow into good things and me completing the puzzle of the world and making it a whole place. V'zehu tashuv hey, as we started the chapter, tata'a mibchinat galut.
This then is the meaning of the teaching of the Zohar, quoted in chapter 4, that is to Teshuvah, hay, the return of the lower hay from exile.
So as we said, this is, that's fine. This is tashuv hey. So when we finally turn around and say, oi, look at where I sent the divine light, let me do tshuva properly, and we'll start to describe a little more the internal process of it in chapter 7. And I do that. I return that divine life force to its proper place in the scheme of things, and that hay, so to speak, is returned connected to the divine name. Go ahead, Dan.
As the verse states, the Lord your God, the source of your soul, will return. That is, bring back those of you who return.
And this is a beautiful piece of Hasidus that we can really carry with us through a whole year, and in fact, a whole lifetime. I love this. So as it says, V'shav Hashem Elokecha et shvutecha, you can read it. God will return those of you who return, right? So we're in front of the ark, we're singing, or it's like, I'm back, God's returning me back. It's all about me, 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 me. And here the Alter Rebbe says, hold on. It says Vishav, which really means God will return, right? The conjugation is not correct. So what are we saying? We naturally think God's going to bring us back. What does God need to return to? But no, when we return, Kilamar, im shfutecha, that means that God himself will return with your return. that it's not me that's just returning, it's actually God's self that is returning. And when I do tshuva, I connect myself back to God, but I also return God's hay, and God's self is actually returning as well. So we have the power to dislocate this aspect of God, and we actually have the power when we return that God also returns with us. Seems like a little more responsibility, what? As the sages commented, Scripture does not say he shall bring back, but that he himself will return. So another quote that often when we read something as God will return us, the language itself is actually suggesting that it's God that's returning, not us. So the Alter Rebbe brought a second example with other nuances. Yeah, it's a bit of a mind-blowing idea, right? It almost troubles us. You think, because how can I affect God, right? Is that like what's you seem to respond to that with?
Really hard time with the whole subject. And since we're not in the subject area, that if we do sins, we're rewarded for them.
Well, I mean, who's rewarding us? That's the definitive. That's what clears it up, right? Normally, it's God that's rewarding us, and God is going to normally reward us for good things and maybe punish us for sins. But in this case, who's rewarding us for doing something evil? The Sitra Achra, right? So I mean, would you be surprised if I went and I worked for organized crime and I infiltrated and did something nefarious and helped them out and got them access or money? I say, Smolash. I'm sorry to make them Italian. I love Italians. That's just my Smolash. You've been such a good son to our organization here. Let me set you up with some cash and a house, and like you get rewarded, right, by criminals when you help them. Or if you were any negative thing, if you help it, it's gonna be your friend. It's gonna reward you, right? So why does that strike you as weird?
If I eat bread on Pesach, and then I do tshuva, I'm at a higher place, I'm doing better things now than I do. Is that right?
Well, so the comment was, if I eat bread on Pesach and then I do tshuva, now I return to an even higher place. Is that correct? You'll see that is correct, but that's not what we're talking about now. We're talking about if you eat bread on Pesach and you haven't done tshuva, now what's going to happen is all that light goes into the Sitra Achra, and the Sitra Achra is now giving you benefits in terms of the worldly side of things, right? So, but your connection to God has been demolished. So there's a difference between pre-tshuva, which is what we're talking about now, which is that any negative thing I do is going to actually cause the Sitra Achra to expand, and that will be reflected towards me in worldly things. But that's not really reward. That's just like that's an addictive dynamic. So I wouldn't call it reward so much as, you know, the reflex effect that the klipa has when you feed it. No, you still have a problem with it? Am I misunderstanding? So maybe something up. Am I misunderstanding the yeah?
I have a comment on the thing. If I avoid bread on Pesach, I am also bringing light into the world because I'm doing it.
So you want to be careful, because there actually is a difference between the dynamic of a positive mitzvah and a negative mitzvah, right? So the question was, if I avoid bread on Pesach, I'm also bringing light into the world. In fact, it's eating the matzah on the night of Passover that is the positive commandment that brings light into the world. Eating bread on Pesach at any time is a negative commandment that will cut me off from my flow of holiness. But once I'm cut off from my flow of holiness, then generally the energy is now going into the Sitra Achra. But technically, it's the positive commandments that bring light into the world. It's the negative commandments that, if I avoid them, keep my system intact of how the light flows into the world through my channels. But you know, all that, the technical side of things, I don't think we need to get too bogged in. Like the overall idea is, you do the wrong things, now you cut off your connection to God, that hay gets dislocated, and then this light spills everywhere, and we can undo it by doing tshuva. Yeah.
Answer my question. I was thinking, how much teshuva do you have to do to complete it But what you're saying is, just it's the idea of it.
How much wood would a woodchuck chuck,
So
right?
that's just in the details, how much.
We'll see. And there's actually two levels of tshuva, as we've seen, lower and higher. But we're talking about sincere, complete tshuva, which is actually pretty simple. It's just total, right? It's not like, I promise I'll try to do better, but probably, well, it's like, no, I'm in a place now where I sincerely mean I'm going to not do this again, right? Am I human and weak? And do I know in my mind that last year and the year before I did tshuva and I still messed up? Okay, that's there, but that's different than my sincere commitment that I'm going to not do that again. That's tshuva. And that can't be qualified. That can't be, well, I'll do it just every now and then, right? The Alter Rebbe really means complete tshuva. So short of that will not accomplish what we're talking about. It will have an effect at the level I'm at, but that's not what the Alter Rebbe is talking about. Before we go to chapter 7, and I want to introduce chapter 7 today, it's now getting into the nuts and bolts of how I do this internally, and we'll have two levels in chapter 7 of how we do that. We have a very big day coming up in the community, like all of us who learn the Alter Rebbe's Chassidus. We know what this is? Does anybody in class know what's coming up? I see you smiling. I thought maybe you. So we've talked about this before. There's a date, Yud Tes Kislev. The 19th of Kislev is a very, very lofty date in Chabad Hasidic circles. That means anyone that learns the Alter Rebbe's Chassidus, coming down through any of the Rebbes and any of the works, all based on the Tanya. This is called the written Torah of Chabad Hasidus. And that in 1798, in 1798, let me take our minds back there. You had the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov had the Maggid Mizrich as his main disciple. The Maggid had a circle of disciples, one of whom was the Alter Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe was sent to an area of Russia where everybody was highly intelligent, highly intellectual, like, this Hasidic stuff was just, forget about it. It was crazy. It was not even Jewish. And the Maggid sent the Alter Rebbe to this area to try and deal with these people and share this new form of beautiful, joyful Judaism with them. And they were just ready to cut him apart. And he developed a type of Hasidus that was intellectual Hasidus. Because really most Hasidus was just about emotions. You don't have to understand godliness. How can you? The whole point is your intellect can't understand godliness. Your heart can just see it. And you sit with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe is a holy person, and you learn about what it feels like to be connected to God. You sing, you dance, you pray, you learn, you do mitzvahs, and that's a chassid, right? And who's trying to explain it? How could you even explain it? But the Alter Rebbe went and created this genius form of Hasidus, where he somehow was able to take this Hasidic flow, which was just this heart flow, and create through stories and parables and systems something your mind could sort of wrap around, where you actually got godliness to connect with your brain and with your mind, and that would flow into your heart. And that was specifically for these very intellectual Jews of this region. And people had a problem because in doing that, the Alter Rebbe had taken everything that was concealed, everything that was secret, all the Kabbalistic ideas that were in Chassidus, and it just laid them bare. I mean, you learn the Tanya and you learn about just about the every basic principle in Kabbalah. The Alter Rebbe just puts it out there, right? It was never done. You had to only teach secret information to people secretly who were ready for it. And a number of other complaints they had, right? Let's leave it at that. So there was a huge debate and people, claiming that this wasn't even Judaism and how could he do it? And finally, some people slandered him to the Tsar and said all kinds of things that he was working to undercut the Tsar's power. And the Alter Rebbe was arrested and put into jail. And he could have been killed because he was arrested on capital charges. In the end, it was seen as a heavenly debate about whether or not this Chassidus was appropriate to teach, because nobody was really sure. This was something completely new that you could just pick it up and learn all these secrets. So they thought maybe the reason the Alter Rebbe was arrested, he's a great Rebbe, he shouldn't be arrested. So if heaven allowed him to be arrested, it's because it wasn't just a squabble in the Jewish community, It was a debate in heaven or whether this Hasidus should be allowed to spread on earth or whether it should be just ended. It was giving away too much Kabbalistic information, so to speak. And so when, through rather miraculous process, the Alter Rebbe was freed, they saw it as a sign that heaven had decided that Chabad Hasidus could be taught. The Alter Rebbe was freed. They established it as a day when we celebrate, when we tell stories about the Alter Rebbe, when we actually finish the entire cycle of the Tanya. There's people that learn it every year, right? I learn this on an annual cycle, and you finish it on Yud Tes Kislev and the 20th, which is also connected to it. And that goes to this day. It's actually considered a holy day in Hasidus and Chabad Hasidus. So I want to share just one story that happened through in that episode, just to give you a sense of what kind of tzaddik it is that wrote this book that we're learning from. And that goes to when he was first arrested. Because they say that a complete tzaddik, a really powerful holy tzaddik, their keeping Judaism can affect the physical world. And we have lots of stories of miracles that happen around tzaddikim. So in fact, you wonder how someone like the Alter Rebbe, who was clearly considered a new soul, the Maggid of Mizrich and the Baal Shem Tov knew about him before he was born. They said this great tzaddik is coming. We know he's going to be born around this time, and you have to be careful he should learn this and not that. And he shouldn't meet the Baal Shem Tov because he has to be a disciple of the Maggid. And they knew he was like a major person amongst this secret society of Kabbalists. So how is it that a person like that could be arrested just by physical forces? You'd think that holiness should be able to adapt the world such that it couldn't happen. So this is a story that kind of illustrates a little bit of that. But to explain how it is that he got arrested, there's one anecdote of when he was in his home and the SARS soldiers first came to his house, and he heard that they were coming, and he decided now's not a good time to get arrested. He slipped out of the side door, the back door, and they came and they couldn't find him, and they left empty-handed. And this was during Sukkot. So he wanted to observe Sukkot. Obviously, it was going to be tricky. And he was talking to one of his very famous Hasidim called Shmuel Munkus, Reb Shmuel Munkus, who was a funny guy, a very, very holy guy, but you're allowed to be funny in Jewish holiness. And this guy was like a real, he was the crack up of the group, and lots of stories and jokes that he would make, but always with a point. And the Alter Rebbe was weighing, should he let himself be arrested or not? Partly, should he just turn himself in? And partly, you assume he has ways of arranging it so that he just isn't arrested, right? And Shmuel Munkus said, of course the Rebbe should let himself be arrested because if you truly are the Rebbe that we understand you to be, you have nothing to fear. They can't touch you, no matter what happens. You're this godly person on earth. How's that going to happen? And B, if you're not really the Rebbe we think, then you deserve to be punished for taking away the joy of any worldly thing from so many thousands of people, right? Which is funny because like in Hasidus, the whole point is like, I'm not enjoying the world. I'm just here to do godly things. So these people are really serious, that they didn't bother tasting their food. They didn't enjoy anything for its own sake. It was all for godliness. And so if the Alter Rebbe came and really brought them to that level where they didn't have a taste for the world anymore, and he wasn't for real, he deserved to be punished. So this was his way of saying. So after that, the Alter Rebbe was in his house the next time they arrived, and he was arrested. And the way they would transport prisoners in Tsarist Russia who were under capital crimes, they had a carriage called the Black Mary. And it was this ominous black carriage covered in solid black plating with no windows whatsoever. So you were just stuck in this black tomb, so to speak. Big, solid carriage. And so they clammed him up in this carriage and they started on their way. And this was Thursday night. And they were carriaging. What do you call it? You drive a carriage? They were driving their carriage to Petersburg. And Friday morning rolls around and the Alter Rebbe is communicating with the guards. He says, can we please stop because Shabbos is coming. So I want to spend Shabbos. We can't travel on Shabbos. The guards are like, what are you talking about, Jew? You're a prisoner. We're taking you, nothing to do with Shabbos, right? As soon as they said that, the wheels fell off the carriage. Like the axle broke and the wheels literally fell off the carriage. And this is not, this is actually, this really happened with official soldiers, right? We know where the spot is. So okay, what's going on here? They take the axle, they fix it, they put the wheels back on the carriage. They got to go, and one of the horses falls down and dies. I mean, cruelty to animals aside, right? Like no animals are harmed in the telling of the story, at least. But like, so first the wheels fall off, then a horse dies. So they get more horses. Time is going on. They harness the horses up. They go to pull the carriage, and it just won't move. Now there's no reason. This is the Tsar's carriage. It's obviously a high quality carriage. It's big. There's strong horses. Like there's no reason this carriage shouldn't move. And the Alter Rebbe is sitting there, and they're looking at it. And finally, the commanding officer realizes there's more going on here than just coincidence. And he goes to the Alter Rebbe, he says, fine, we won't travel on Shabbat, but is it okay? Can we just travel to a nearby town? We'll spend Shabbat in the town. The Alter Rebbe says, no, at this point, that's not acceptable. And they keep trying, and the carriage won't move. And so finally they negotiate. They'll take the carriage off the road and they'll spend Shabbat in a field next to the road. The Alter Rebbe says, fine. And then suddenly the horses can move, the carriage goes, they set up in the field, and there's still tzaddikim in that area that know the exact field and the place where the Alter Rebbe spent that Shabbat. So this is, I mean, imagine this is like an official thing that happened with soldiers, and like how it's crazy. So they stopped and they spent Shabbat in that field on the way. And that's just to give you a sense that a holy person like this, somehow, when they want to keep Shabbat, it can bend a little bit the normal laws of nature. And the last Rebbe points out, he actually said, this wouldn't be surprising if it was actually the time to light candles. That's what he says. Because of course at tzaddik, when Shabbat's coming, of course, how could the carriage move? I mean, the whole world is built around a tzaddik observing Shabbos and observing mitzvahs. So what's a carriage? How is a carriage going to get in the way of that? But the Rebbe said, what's remarkable is that it was 10 in the morning when he said it and the carriage stopped. So, for him, he was thinking about his preparations for Shabbat. It wasn't even actually Shabbat. And the fact that the tzaddik at 10 in the morning said, no, now it's time to get ready for Shabbat. We can't travel anymore. That stopped the carriage. That's what makes this story remarkable. So there you have the delightful Hasidic story around Yud Tes Kislev. It's coming, right? Tuesday night is going to be the big celebration in town, if you want to look it up. And it's Tuesday and Wednesday is the 19th and 20th of Kislev. So we won't be having a class. In fact, I'll be getting ready to go to Israel, God willing. But if you want to maybe review one of our videos, pick up a little book, go online and find something connected to the Alter Rebbe, it's a beautiful day to learn the Alter Rebbe's Chassidus. Any thoughts on that? It's deep, very deep stuff. Yeah, this isn't.
It wasn't when he got arrested. It wasn't when he was released.
The 19th is when he was released. The 19th is when he was released. So after this episode, he finally was imprisoned. He was questioned. Many stories around how that happened, and finally the Tsar freed him. And when the date he was freed, that was seen as the big day. So this is what we're celebrating. Let's give a little intro to chapter 7, so we know we're picking up. And I'll be in Israel for a few weeks, so I won't be here with you, but trying to do good things over there. Chapter 7, we start looking at now 2 steps in actually doing everything we've learned. Right, so we learned that tshuva is a wholehearted return to doing right things, not doing wrong things. We've learned that it is returning the hay, so it's not just me, but it's actually impacting the connection of the divine letter hay. We've learned that it affects how the divine light that's flowing through my channels of divine providence is flowing into the positive side of things. Okay, now how do I actually do this thing? Well, if I sat and say, today do this, tomorrow do this, here we get more into that. And the first step that we want to understand, and let's touch a little of it, and then I'll expand. So we're on page 245 in chapter 7. Ve'ulam derech hamed v'hayashar livchinat tshuva tata, hey tata hanizkeret la'el hem beit dvarim derech klal. Why don't you go ahead, Eleanor? You want to give it a nice loud read?
However, the true and direct path to the lower level of Kibbutz, returning the later hay as noted above, involves 2 general elements.
Right. So where we're going to turn God. Now, how do we do it? There's 2 elements to what we need to do. Ha'echad hu le'orei rachamim helyonim mimkor harachamim al nishmato v'nafsho helokit.
The first is to awaken supreme compassion from the source of mercy for one's divine spirit and soul.
So the first is, I want to arouse compassion from the source of mercy. From the source of mercy. And that means on my divine spirit and my soul, that first of all, I should have compassion. Like, look where my divine soul has gone. It's had to go through all this negative, counterproductive activities, and look at the impact it's had. Imagine a mother of children who was hypnotized into harming her own children, and her eyes had to watch as her hands were like harming her own children. Imagine the grief she'd experienced, that she herself was the one that had been trapped into this terrible activity of harming her own children. She had to watch it, and her own hands were the one doing it. It's a nightmare, right? And that's the experience of the Shekhinah. That's the experience of God's energy and oneness, in that it's exiled in our own other-centeredness. And when we do an Avera, that's God's own energy that's actually undoing everything that's supposed to happen correctly in the world. And how that must feel for my divine soul, and for its source, for the Hey in the Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey of God's name, that lofty oneness that just created the world to create joy and oneness, now it's being used to do the exact opposite and to undermine everything that godliness, everything that God wanted in creating the world. And the key is compassion. So I should think, oi, right? The way my divine soul feels and the way God feels having had done this, right? That I took this energy that was in exile in my ego, and I actually went and I did X, right? And then we're gonna amp up the stakes here. Shenafla meigra rama chaye hakayim baruchu levira amikta. I'll read it. That has fallen from lofty heights, from an infinite source of life, into a deep pit, where hein hechlot hatuma v'sitra achara, namely where the chambers of defilement in the sitra achara. So you name it, right? A person yelled at someone, a person stole, a person went online and did who knows what, a person, a person went and thought about doing those things in a sustained way. And that's godly energy being taken from this lofty height, from the actual Hey of God's name, from the Shekhinah itself, and through my own process, now falls even further than just the klipa, the klipas noga, but goes right into the completely negative side of reality, from the highest place into this deep pit. And I'll say later, and one should arouse divine compassion as well for the source of my soul and the source of life, the four-letter name of God. So the whole point of this is to make sure that tshuva is not about me, right? Every Yom Kippur we come and we think, I have to do tshuva, I have to reconnect to God, I have to apologize for my sins, I. And sometimes what that can be is, as a Jew, I'm not comfortable being a negative person that's done bad things. I'm uneasy about it. It causes me suffering. It causes me cognitive dissonance. And so I feel better if I've done tshuva and now I feel things are right. I'm connected to God, right? So pre-Yom Kippur, I come and I'm like, oi, this year I was such a bad person. I did this, I did that. I really need to do tshuva. And then afterwards, I'm like, that's such a relief. I feel so much better now that I am connected to God, right? No, says the Alter Rebbe, you can't do tshuva from your perspective. You got to get out of yourself. The first stage of tshuva is to completely reverse that and to not say, this isn't about me feeling like now I'm less of a Rasha, or now look at me, I'm feeding the positive side of reality. I've undone everything I've done. Thank God, I feel better. The point is, arouse compassion on your soul, right? Because me is usually my ego. Arouse compassion on your divine soul and on the source of that soul, on the Hey of God's name. And just think about what you put that divine soul and what you put God's own energy through in everything that you did. And you're doing tshuva for that sake. You want to undo that damage. You want to repair what's happened in God's name.
I thought the first step was to say publicly what you did.
Correct. That's technical. So the first step is to say publicly what you did, or at least to the person you did it to, right? So I'm not now talking about the technical steps of tshuva, which you have to happen, right? There's no point me rending my soul or having compassion on my soul if I never apologized yet to so-and-so for X, right?
So then how do we do this?
This is after. So in the first chapters, we looked at the technical side of tshuva, and that yes, there's different stages of it, and the first one is you have to go and address it if it's with another person. And then you have to commit to not doing it, and then Yom Kippur will cleanse, and different stages of it. Now we're talking about emotionally, how do I do the work of fully repairing and restoring the connection with God? And to do that, if it's about me doing tshuva, that's not effectively going to be tshuva. Why? Because ultimately, that's still about me feeling better. I feel bad that I did mitzvah, that I did avera is great. That's probably a good thing, right? That should be normal, right? I want to do tshuva because I feel uneasy about my state, right? I feel like I've done bad things. Now I do tshuva and I feel better. Okay, what happens now the next time I want to feel good about myself? Because that's all that's happening. Now I'm going to do something that I like, and maybe it's going to be an avera, maybe a bigger avera, right? So unless I've reversed it, unless I've made it about God, I'm still feeding that part of me that wants the pleasure. I'm still centering this around me. And as we learned in other parts, as long as I'm there, holiness can't be there. I have to take myself out of it. So ultimately, to do this, step one is to genuinely spend time meditating on and go deeply into not how great I'm going to feel when I do tshuva, and maybe I'll be less of a Rasha and more of a Beinoni or whatever, but really go into God's perspective. I'm doing this because I really put God through the ringer. And God wants to have that repaired. God's going to have such relief. God's going to have such a wholeness. God's name will be reunited. And basically, it's just whatever the universe needs, whatever God wants, that's going to cause God pleasure. And I'm committing to that. And getting myself and my status afterwards, my state afterwards out of it is the first stage of the real internal tshuva and reconnecting that bond. And he'll go into it a little more when we come back in chapter 7. But it's been a pleasure learning with all of you. We're about halfway through this book, so really beautiful work. If you'd like to join us, please email Maya at temple-israel.org. As always, we'd love to have you join on the Zoom and reading and participating, or here in real time. And wishing you a wonderful few weeks while I'm away in Israel.